Chaim.
Chaim
Lebracha. So we learn in this week's Parsha about a person who has tsaras, an affliction of tsaras on his skin, which is a sign that he wasn't behaving the way he should. He either spoke badly about another person, was stingy, or there are some other averos that might cause it. So this is not an ordinary illness that you need to go to a doctor. Instead, this is a spiritual illness, a spiritual malady. And the Torah tells us that you need to go to a Kohen to examine. Right? The Kohen are the ones who examine you. And the Torah says you should go to Aaron the Kohen or to one of his children, the Kohanim. And there are a few questions over there. First of all, there are many laws that involve a Kohen, and there are many Kohanim in all the generations. Why does the Torah say you should go to Aaron the Kohen? Why do we choose Aaron? There are many Kohanim, right? And Aaron was only in the first generation. Furthermore, why do you need to go to a Kohen in the first place? You should go to a rabbi who study the laws of tsaras, right? The Rambam writes that if there is even if there's a great rabbi who knows all the laws, it's not enough to go to a rabbi. You have to go to a Kohen. As a matter of fact, the Rambam says if the Kohen does not know the laws of tsaras, right? Even if there are, let's say, if the only Kohen in town is a little child, a young child. The Rambam says that the rabbi of the town should come and examine the tsaras, and he should tell the child, this tsaras is pure, and the child will say, it's pure, right? Or, chas v'shalom, it's not pure, and the child will say, it's not pure. So the obvious question is, what's the point of having this young child announce that whether you're pure or not? Why don't you just have the rabbi who knows all the laws? So, when me and my wife got married, for the first year, we lived in the small town of Kfar Chabad, and we had a little apartment, or a little house at the edge all the way at the edge of Kfar Chabad. Our house was on a dead end street that you're on, the other side. The end of our street was where the city ended, and when you got to the end of the street, there was like trees, like a bunch of bushes and trees over there, and right behind them there was a fence, and right behind the fence there was the train tracks. Right along the side of the city, the train ran right along the side of Parshas. And right after we got married, a few days after our wedding, I noticed that on the block that we lived, the block where we lived, there was a group of teenagers who lived on that block, and they weren't the most religious teenagers in the neighborhood, right? Haven't they released? I didn't say that. You heard what I said, right? And I noticed something very strange. I noticed that these teenagers, every morning, they would go all the way to the end of the street, and they would go through the bushes, like make their way between the bushes to go like behind the bushes and trees over there. And I thought to myself, what could these guys be doing there, right? There's nothing there. There's a fence and some train tracks behind. And unfortunately, no, I didn't spy on them. Their privacy, I'm not going to get involved. But through my mind, I don't know if it's even willingly, just maybe even unwillingly, through my mind, the thought popped into my head, they're probably up to no good. They're probably up to no good, right? What could they be doing there?
Drunk.
Maybe they're drinking, maybe they're doing drugs. I try to, judge them kind of favorably. Maybe they're doing, light drugs. Maybe they're just doing marijuana or something, not doing anything terrible, And this went on for a few weeks. I got married about a week and a half before Pesach. I never spied on them. It's not something I had any interest in doing. I got married about a week and a half before Pesach. So this went on until till about a week after Pesach. So, about 3 and a half, 4 weeks after my wedding. And at that point, my wife, who was a teacher in Tel Aviv, obviously after the wedding, she stopped work. She didn't work for a few weeks, but after she went back to work. So she had to go to Tel Aviv every morning. And how do you go to Tel Aviv? You go to Tel Aviv by train. And I, being a good husband, I wanted to go with her to the train station. And that's when I realized that the fastest way from our house to the train station was obviously to walk along the train tracks, right? It seems pretty obvious when you think about it. And me and my wife every morning would go to the end of the town, crawl through the bush, squeeze through the bushes over there, and walk along the train tracks to the train station, right? And I saw the teenagers walking together with us, and I felt, I was thinking to myself, how could I not have realized such a thing? Right? And I hope that anybody who sees me going through the bushes to walk next to the train tracks isn't thinking anything the same way I was thinking about those teenagers. But the truth is, this is human nature. Human nature is when we see somebody doing something that seems strange or unusual, the first thought that pops into our head is they're probably doing something wrong. Right? Even though the most obvious explanation is probably that they're not doing something wrong. Right? They probably have a good reason for it. But in our head, the first thought that pops in is there must be a problem here. And this is not just me. This is, everybody's like this. This is the famous story that's told by Moshe Feinstein. He once went to a big simcha, I think it was a simcha or some sort of meeting of Rabbanim, I think it was. And they met up in someone's house. And the host, when all these rabbis came to his house, he brought out some tea and some coffee for them. So he brought the tea, coffee to the table. He brought out some milk. And he brought out 2 bottles of milk to the table. He brought out 2 bottles of milk to the table. And it happens to be that there were 2 different brands, 2 different companies. And Rab Moshe Feinstein was sitting at the table. He made himself a coffee. And then he reached out and he picked up one of the bottles of milk. He stopped for a second. He looked at it. He put it down.
And took the other one.
And he took the other bottle of milk. Everybody in the room started talking. Well, what's going on? There must be a problem. Right? The first company must be a problem with their kashrus. Word quickly spread throughout the community, and people stopped buying the first brand of milk. So the owner of the first company was very upset. Why is nobody buying my milk? Of course, he quickly heard the story, and he went to Rav Moshe, and he said, Rav Moshe, what's wrong with my milk?
Nothing.
Rav Moshe said, nothing. Who said something's wrong with your milk? So he said, well, it's you. You didn't want to drink my milk. What are you talking about? I drink your milk all the time. And he said, well, a few weeks ago, there was, you're at this event, and they served milk, and you picked up my milk, and you put it down, and then you took the other milk. And Rav Moshe thought for a minute, and he says, oh, of course, I picked up the bottle, and it was empty, so I put it down, and I took the other one. Right?
I knew.
Now, obviously, if you think about it for a second, it happens all the time that we take a bottle of milk, right? So today already it's different bottles. Today the milk is in plastic bottles where you can kind of see when it's empty. 50 years ago the milk was in like orange juice bottles that they have today, like the cartons. Yeah, so you weren't able to see, and that was a completely normal thing. And yet, everyone in the room who saw this happen, not one of them thought to themselves, "It must be empty." The first thought that popped into their head was there must be something wrong with the milk.
I didn't even
and
check.
that's human nature.
Because you're dumb.
That's human nature. Why is this human nature? So on one hand, it's actually, on one hand, there's a good reason for it. The reason is that we, as people, we're always careful. We don't want to get tricked or scammed by somebody who's doing something wrong, who's doing something bad. So we're always suspicious, which might be a good thing at times. But we have to realize that it's one thing to be suspicious and to, when you deal with somebody, you have to be careful not to let the guy trick you and not to let somebody take advantage of you. But on the other hand, it doesn't mean I have to think in my mind that he's a bad person. I could think that he's a good person, I respect him, and still act carefully when I'm dealing with him. And the truth is, very often, when there is indeed in cases where there is indeed a problem, very often the problem is more with us than with the other person. And we never think that maybe we're the one who's wrong, right? Even though that's probably more likely, right? But that's not what pops to our heads. This story was told over by a woman named Carol Yofi. I think she's from Philadelphia. She says that she once had to take a flight, and she arrived at the airport a few hours early. She was by herself, and she was at the airport a few hours early, so she had to figure out a way to spend a few hours. So she went to one of the shops over there, and she bought 2 things. She bought a book to read, for the next few hours, and she bought a package of cookies, right, to eat during the few hours. And she found a place that they didn't even announce the gate yet. It was so early. So she found a place somewhere in the middle of the airport where she could sit down, with a bunch of benches. She sat down and started reading her book. And the man came and sat down right next to her. And she's reading her book. And suddenly she notices that this man who's sitting next to her reaches out and takes a cookie from the bag of cookies that was between them. And she thinks to herself, what nerve? Doesn't ask me. He wants a cookie. I can give him a cookie. But he doesn't even ask.
I figured it out.
So she quickly reaches out and she takes a cookie. And the guy looks at her. Okay, yeah, he smiles at her. A minute later, the guy reaches out. He takes another cookie. Not a minute later. A few minutes later, he takes another cookie. Right? Another few minutes go by. She takes another cookie, and the guy takes a cookie with her. Finally, the package is emptying out. And there's only one cookie left. And and the guy looks at her, and she looks at him. And the guy reaches out, he takes the cookie, and he breaks it in half, and he says, here, this is for you, and this is for me. And she thinks to herself, what nerve. Not only did you take half my cookies, there's one cookie left, and you're splitting it with me? You're doing me a favor? You're giving me half of my cookie? She gets up. She gets up. She just walks away. She's furious. She goes, tries to finds out where her gate is, and she goes to her gate, and she waits there angrily until her flight, until it's time to get on the flight. And finally, she gets on the plane, and she opens up the bag, and sits down in her seat on the plane, and she opens up the bag to take out her book. And what does she see in the bag? Package of cookies. And that's when she realized that it wasn't the other guy who was taking her cookies, right? Whatever she thought about him, she hopes that he wasn't thinking the same about her, right? So we never think that maybe I'm the one who's doing something wrong. We don't even stop to think about that. L'chaim. It's always the other person. And that's human nature. And in these examples that we gave, right, the solution actually is pretty obvious if you think about it, right? Empty bottle of milk is pretty obvious. But there are cases where it's more far-fetched, the solution, where the truth is harder to think of. But our job is to try to think, how could we justify and judge another person favorably, right? The Torah says, you should judge your friend. You should judge your friend justly. What does it mean, justly? Righteously? So Rashi tells us it means you should judge them favorably. You should judge them favorably. If you're not sure if they did something wrong or not, you should judge them l'kaf zechus, to the side of merit. So everybody asks, what do you mean judge them favorably? It says you do justly. You should judge them truthfully. Who says favorably is truthful? So the explanation is that when we're talking about your friends, we're talking about another person, a person you know, and a fellow Jew, a person who you don't have any reason to think that there's no reason for you to think they're doing anything wrong. Most of the things that you'll see that might look suspicious are actually nothing wrong. Most of the times when you'll see your friend doing something strange and you'll think there's a problem, in most of the cases, probably 90% of the time, they're not doing anything wrong. You just don't understand what's going on. Even if the solution might be very far-fetched. There was a seminary girl. Her name was Chana, or at least that's what I decided to call her. She was studying in Israel for a year, and she went for a few weeks she was in Yerushalayim most of the time, and she went for a few weeks to Tzfas. And there came time for her to go back to Yerushalayim. So she packed all of her stuff. And she was supposed to take a bus the next day, and she put all of her suitcases in the house of a family that she had gotten to know when she was there, the Gold family. And she put her suitcases there, and she was going to come the next day to pick it up. Now, the Gold family wasn't going to be home then, so they left a key for her that she should be able to open up the door and take her suitcases. So she comes to pick up her suitcases. She comes in. As soon as she comes in, she puts down her pocketbook near the door. And she gets ready she starts getting her stuff together, and there's a knock on the door. And she goes to the door, and there's this girl, Rachel, who also had come there a short while earlier to learn, and she had come to visit. She wanted to say hello to the Golds, and when she heard they weren't home, okay, they weren't home, she's going to come back a different time, but she says, I'm thirsty, maybe you can get me a drink of water. So Hannah goes to the kitchen, comes back with a drink of water, and then she leaves Rachel in the dining room with the water, and she goes to the back of the house to get her suitcases. And when she comes back, she finds that Rachel is gone, and so is her pocketbook. What chutzpah! To leave and take my pocketbook with you? What's she gonna do? She has her credit cards there, her passport, all of course, money. And she doesn't know what to do. She can't go. She can't travel now. She cancels the taxi that's supposed to take her to the bus station, and she doesn't know what to do. She's gonna have to spend. She's not able to go back to Yerushalayim like this. She has to start arranging things, looking. Anyways, a few hours later, she decides she'll go outside. Maybe she'll look around. Maybe the thief. After taking her pocketbook, maybe dropped it somewhere. Probably took the money and dropped the pocketbook. So she decided to go around the block and look for it. And to her surprise, she sees at the end of the block, there's like a garbage can over there. And right next to the garbage, there's the pocketbook. Sitting there on the floor. It's all dirty and muddy. And she rushes over, hoping that at least her credit cards and documents are still there, even though the money might be missing. And she comes and she's shocked. And she sees that everything is inside. Nothing is missing. Nothing is missing. Why would the thief just leave her pocketbook over here? So she starts thinking. She says, it must have happened. She figured it out. She says, Rachel must have taken my pocketbook, and as she was running out, somebody was watching her, and she realized someone's looking at her, and she was embarrassed, so she just threw the pocketbook down on the floor. That's probably what happened. She thinks to herself. Right? So, okay, fine. So anyway, she missed the bus already by now. She's going to have to stay another day. So later that night, Mrs. Gold, the owner of the house, came home, and Hannah starts telling her what happened. She says, "You wouldn't believe what happened. I left my pocketbook on the floor, and someone took it." And Mrs. Gold starts laughing, and she's like, "Why are you laughing? Is it funny?" And she says, "Yeah, I should have warned you. We've been having this problem recently for the past few weeks. Cats have been coming in, and you leave anything near the door, cats come in and you just pull it out." Right? Especially something if you have a pocketbook with a strap, the cats are going to go schlep it outside. Right? Now, is that something I would have thought of? Probably not. Right? That a cat came in and dragged out the pocketbook. But when it comes to judging another person favorably, Reb Chaim Ozer Gudzinski was once asked by his students. He was asked, we know that everything Hashem created in the world was created for a purpose, for a good purpose, that we should use it in the service of Hashem. So why did Hashem create, right, a krumesvara, crooked logic? Right? The way logic works, you would think that logically, you could only logically make a valid logical argument. But if a person wants, they can argue and come up with logical reasons to say things that make no sense. I know people like that. They like to argue, and they'll argue even though they know what they're saying doesn't make any sense. They're going to come up with some sort of logical reason to justify their arguments. Right? Why did Hashem create crooked logic? So Chaim Ozer says, you know why? Because Hashem wanted us to use crooked logic when we see somebody doing something that looks bad and we can't come up with a good justification. So we should use crooked logic to justify their actions. Right? The cat came in and dragged out the pocketbook. And there are times when we can't think up a solution, even using crooked logic. So what's the solution then? What's the solution then? So the Torah tells us that when we judge another person, we're just like a judge in court. A judge in court is not allowed to issue a verdict without hearing both sides of the story. If somebody comes in and tells you the story, if you have a bunch of witnesses coming in to tell you the story, you still cannot issue a verdict until you hear the other side. The person, you ask the person what happened. You know, the person who's being accused, you have to hear his side of the story. Right? And the truth is that same thing with us. When we see somebody else doing something strange, even if we try to think of some excuse for them and we can't think of anything, we have to actually go with them and talk to them and ask them, what happened? Rabbi Eli Teitelbaum says over the following story. He writes that he got a phone call one night from his friend, Yosef. Yosef is making a wedding soon. Yosef wants to know. He's looking for a for a photographer for the wedding, and he asked Rabbi Teitelbaum if he knows any good photographers. So Rabbi Teitelbaum says, yeah, Feivel is a good friend of mine. He's a very good photographer. He does a very good job. He's very, very good prices, very fair prices. And Yosef says, I heard about him, but I hear he's not very reliable. Really? He's not reliable? I know him very well. What do you mean he's not reliable? So Yosef says, well, I heard that recently, a few weeks ago, he came to a bar mitzvah to take pictures at a bar mitzvah, and he arrived halfway through the bar mitzvah. Right? He missed the first half of the bar mitzvah, right? And obviously, if you're hiring a photographer for your event, you cannot have them coming halfway through the event. Usually they come a few hours early to make sure they set everything up and they're ready in time. To come halfway through an event, I wouldn't want to hire somebody like that. So Rabbi Teitelbaum is shocked. He says, are you sure? Are you sure this really happened? He came halfway through the event? And he says, yeah, I actually verified it. I spoke with Yisrael. He was in the band that night. He told me the story, but I still didn't trust. I thought he might have made a mistake. So I spoke to another person, another friend of mine who was also at the bar mitzvah, and they all verified the story. And they said that the father of bar mitzvah was frantic in the beginning of the wedding. Where's the photographer? And halfway through the bar mitzvah, he shows up. So Rabbi Eli Teitelbaum thinks, and he says, it could be an emergency came up. Perhaps there was terrible traffic, or maybe his car broke down, right? And he wasn't able to make it. And Yosef says, you're right. It might be true. It may be true that there was terrible traffic and his car may have broken down, but I'm not taking any chances, right? A photographer's job, his most important job of a photographer, is to be there in time, to be there early. He should have set out 2 hours early to make sure that he's going to get there in time. He should have arranged things in a way that he's going to get there even if he does have an emergency, even if his car does break down. I don't want to take any chances. So Rabbi Teitelbaum thinks to himself, he has a good point. He says, I have to talk to him about it, right? I come up with excuses. I can make up excuses, but even my best excuses don't really justify his actions. So what do? I have to talk to him about it. So that's what he did. So the next day, he went over to him in Shul, and he said, hello, Feivel, how are you doing? And he says, Feivel, is it true that a couple of weeks ago you came to a bar mitzvah, you came to this and this bar mitzvah, and you came in the middle of the bar mitzvah? And Feivel's like, yeah, of course, it's true. But why are you asking? He said, what do you mean, why am I asking? I just recommended you to somebody, and they said that they can't trust you. You're not reliable because you came halfway through the event. And Feivel's face drops, and he's like, what? They're saying that I'm not reliable? Do you know what happened? I wasn't the photographer for that bar mitzvah. No. What happened was the photographer couldn't make it. The father of our mitzvah called me desperately in the middle of our mitzvah. He begged me to come. I was busy. I was doing other things. And I said, as a favor to you, as a personal favor, I'll drop everything I'm doing and I'll do my best to come as quickly as possible. How could somebody say something like that? Right? So you might see something. You might be at the mitzvah and see the photographer walk in late. But do you know what really happened? Do you know what's really going on? And we have to realize that the way we judge others is the way Hashem judges us. In the year 1914, during the First World War, Yerushalayim at that time was ruled by the Ottoman Empire, was in a very dire situation. Right, the whole economy had collapsed at the beginning of the war, and poverty was rampant. It was, people didn't have money to buy food. People saved every penny they could, and it was very difficult to survive. The prices soared. There was terrible inflation, and there was one man, Yerushalayim Chaim, was his name. And, he did everything he could to save every penny that he had to try to, to make sure his family is taken care of during the war. And he was able to sell some of his possessions and put together a nice sum of money. And he bought a golden Napoleon. A gold Napoleon was a type of coin that they had in that time, and a gold Napoleon was probably for the most valuable coins that there were at that time. It was a fortune of money, and he knew he was going to keep this for his family if they needed it. And there were no people didn't really use banks in those days, so he brought it into his home and he put it on top of a cabinet in his house where he figured it would be safe. Right? He figured it would be safe over there. But he didn't realize that one day his 3-year-old son or his 4-year-old son was climbing on top of the cabinet and he found a coin. Right? He doesn't know that this is a golden Napoleon. He doesn't know what type of coin it is, but he figures, you got a coin, you can go buy some candy. So the little boy goes out to the store and he buys some candy with the coin. A few days later, Chaim is looking on top of the cabinet and the coin is missing. He starts running around the house looking for it, asking everybody what happened, and finally his 4-year-old son admitted that he took the coin and he bought some candy with it. Chaim is furious. Where did you go? I went to Shimon's store, Shimon's grocery. Chaim runs to Shimon and he says, what did you do with my golden Napoleon? He said, we're talking a golden Napoleon. He bought a copper penny you brought for me. What are you lying? It was a golden Napoleon. It was the only coin we had in our house. That's what my son took. Shimon said, what are you talking about? He brought me a copper penny and I gave him some candy for it. And they start arguing, and they decide to go to court. So they went to the Beis Din in Yerushalayim at the time, and the Beis Din says since Shimon admitted that he got the coin, it was an argument about how much. He's considered a moed b'miktzas. And what's the halacha of a moed b'miktzas?
Give him, swear.
He has to swear that he got a copper penny. Okay? Shimon is not very excited that he has to swear, but that's what the Beis Din says. So he takes an oath that it was a copper penny. And, the court says if he swore, he doesn't need we have to trust him. But even though the court trusted him, the people who heard about the story weren't very happy. And words quickly spread throughout Yerushalayim. Everybody was talking about the story. You heard what Shimon did. He takes advantage of a little boy who doesn't know the value of a coin. And people stopped going to Shimon's store. It was an unofficial boycott of Shimon's store. People stopped going. He quickly fell into debt. He had to close his store down. And a few years went by. When the war finally ended in 1918, the situation in Yerushalayim got a little bit better. And people were it still wasn't easy, but it was a lot easier than it was during the war. And one day, Chaim gets a letter. He gets a letter. And he opens up the letter and he's shocked by what he sees. In the letter, it says like this. It says, I am the one who borrowed your coin. I'll tell you what happened. It's an anonymous letter, right? An anonymous letter he gets, right? I'll tell you what happened with the coin. What happened was, this was a few years ago, and I didn't have any food for my family. My children were starving. I didn't have bread to give them, and I went into the street to try to figure out how I can feed my family. And as I'm walking through the street, says this thief, right? I see a little boy walking around with a golden Napoleon. And I thought to myself, a kid, a 4-year-old boy walking around with a golden Napoleon? He must be from a very wealthy family who has money to throw away. So I thought to myself, my family is starving. I'll borrow the coin, and when I have a chance, I'll repay. And that's what I did. I borrowed the coin. I took a penny out of my pocket, and I told the boy, hey, let's switch coins. He didn't realize there's a difference between them. And I switched it for a copper penny. And and I used it to feed my family. And now, and of course, I only borrowed it. I didn't mean to steal it. And now that I have enough money, I'm returning the golden Napoleon. And in the envelope was the golden Napoleon.
How do you know it was him?
What?
How do you know who it was?
Oh, the whole Yerushalayim knew about the story, and he probably found out who the boy was. So of course, Chaim was happy. He got the money back. He felt a little guilty about the whole argument he had with Shimon. But even though Chaim was okay, Shimon was not. By this time, Shimon had already passed away. He suffered a lot during the last few years. The store closed down and his reputation ruined. And at that time, Rav Shalom Shvadron would later become a big Maggid in Yerushalayim. He was a little boy when the story took place. And he would say over the story. And he said over what some of the rabbis in Yerushalayim, what some of the elder rabbis said about the story. They said like this. They said, what's going to happen when the people involved in this story one day come up to heaven? How are they going to be judged? So if you look at the main characters in the story, they're all going to be exonerated when they come up to heaven.
What do you mean?
Right? If you take a look, first of all, take a look at Shimon. Shimon did nothing wrong, the storekeeper. He was falsely accused, he suffered a lot, and he accepted Hashem's decree, right? And when he comes up, Hashem's going to look at him very favorably, and the suffering is going to atone for any sins he may have had, and Hashem's going to look very happily on him. Chaim is going to come up to heaven, right? And Chaim is also, he didn't really do anything wrong, right? Obviously, he falsely, he suspected an innocent person. He suspected Shimon, but he was just trying to feed his family, right? He was trying to get the money to feed his family. He didn't do anything wrong. He went to court. He did what the court told him, right? He seems to be a good person.
The thief.
The thief is going to come up to heaven, and you know what? The thief is also going to be exonerated. The thief was also trying to feed his family, right? The thief was trying to feed his family. He was trying to feed a starving family. He didn't even mean to steal. He meant to borrow it. And in the end, he fulfilled the mitzvah of the Torah of returning the lost property. So he's also going to be exonerated. But there's one group of people who are going to get in big trouble. That's all the people who stopped going to Shimon's story. All the people who went around spreading the story, accusing Shimon, getting involved in an argument that had nothing to do with him, destroying another Yid's reputation, destroying his parnasa, and destroying his life. What are they going to say when they come up to heaven? Nobody took any money from them. It didn't affect them in any way. They didn't know what was going on behind, what the truth behind the story. What gave them the right to get involved in this argument? And we have to realize this, right? When we take a look at another person, right? Well, especially, I mean, if it hurt, even if it hurts us, we said you have to try to judge them favorably, but especially in a case where it doesn't affect you. Right? What right do you have to judge and certainly to speak badly about another person? And this is what the Torah is telling us. When you have to judge, when you see an affliction in another person, a nega in another person, right? A tsaras, a sin in another person, and you have to judge if it's pure or not pure. There's only one person who has a right to judge. Aaron HaKoyen. Aaron Ish HaChesed, a man of kindness, a man who is oyev shalom v'roidev shalom, a man who pursued and loved peace. That's the only person who has a right to judge. And of course, his children, the Koyanim. The Koyanim have a mitzvah to bless the Jewish people with love. That's the only one who has a right to judge another person. If you're doing it with love, if you love them the way Aaron loved every single Jew, and the way Aaron loved and pursued peace. And to conclude with the final story, about 150 years ago, maybe more, there was a big gathering of prestigious rabbis in the city of Preshburg. And the rabbi of Preshburg, the Ksav Sofer, the rabbi of Preshburg, got up in the middle of the gathering, and he said he has an announcement to make. He reached into his pocket, and he pulled out from his pocket an old coin. And he said, I want you to take a look at this coin that I have. This is a very rare old coin. It's a machzis shekel. It's a half shekel coin from the time of the Beis Hamikdash. It's a very rare coin. I believe it's perhaps the only coin that remains in the world, he said. And it was, I managed to get this coin, and I want you all to see it. This is a coin that was used in the times of the Beis Hamikdash. And he passed it to the rabbi near him, who looked at it. He passed it around the room. And, the period of time passed. And the meal was up. They were getting ready to bench. And the Ksav Sofer looks around and he says, who has the coin? And everybody looks at their neighbor. Who has the coin? Who has the coin? Everyone's looking around. Nobody has the coin. So the Ksav Sofer says that somebody must have dropped it somewhere. Everybody look around the table, see if you can find the coin. Everybody looks around the table, look under the table. He says maybe somebody accidentally, put it away. Everybody check your pockets, see if you could find the coin. So everybody reaches into their pockets. They start checking. Nobody has the coin. So the Ksav Sofer says, we don't have a choice. This is a very, very valuable coin, and I know it's not so comfortable, but I'm going to ask everybody to reach into their friend's pocket and check if your friend has the coin in their pockets. So there was an elderly rabbi from Hungary, Rabbi Yehuda Assad, who was at this gathering, and he got up and he said, Rabbi Isai, how can we do such a thing? We have a gathering here of Rabbonim, of prominent, important rabbis. You're going to tell everybody to check each other's pockets? So Tzav Sefer says, you're right, but what do we do? This is a very, very valuable coin. We have to get it back. And he says, listen, we'll spend another few minutes looking for it. Let's wait 10 minutes, and we'll see if we can find it. So the next 10 minutes, they spend some time looking around. Everybody's looking everywhere. They get help. Everybody's looking around. The waiters are coming in. Everybody's trying to find it. 10 minutes go by, and they still don't find it. So the Tzav Sefer says, listen, we tried. We couldn't find it. I'm going to ask everybody to check their friends' pockets. And again, Rabbi Yehuda Assad gets up, and he says, we cannot do this. Let's wait another 10 minutes. Okay? They wait another 10 minutes, and another 10 minutes go by, and they still don't find it. And again, the Tzav Sefer gets up, and he says, it's time. We waited. It's not here. Obviously, somebody couldn't resist the temptation. We're going to have to check each other's pockets. And again, Rabbi Yehuda Assad gets up, and there are tears in his eyes, and he says, please, let's not do this. Let's try one more time. Let's wait 10 more minutes and see if we can find it. Okay, he's a very prominent, important rabbi, so they all agree, this is the last time. We're going to wait 10 minutes. 8 minutes go by, and somebody comes running in from the kitchen, one of the waiters, and he says, I found it. We were cleaning up one of the tablecloths we were cleaning, and we found the coin. And the Tzav Sefer is very happy. He takes the coin, and then everybody in the room looks at Rabbi Yehuda Assad. And they say, maybe you could explain to us what's going on over here. And Rabbi Yehuda Assad says, I would be happy to explain. As a matter of fact, not just to explain, I'll show you what's going on. And he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out an identical coin. And he says, I also recently managed to find the same exact rare coin. And I was also planning to show everybody this coin at this gathering. But when the Tzav Sefer got up and he said that this is perhaps the only coin in the whole world, I didn't want to argue with him. I didn't want to, to take some of his glory. So I kept quiet and I didn't tell anybody that I had the coin. But you can imagine my horror when they get up and they say everyone's going to start checking in each other's pockets. And he says, I want everybody to stop for a second and think, what would have happened if I wouldn't have asked for 10 minutes? If we would have checked each other's pockets and somebody would have found this coin in my pocket. And I would have said, this is my coin that I also brought. I also managed to get the same rare coin and I happened to have it at the same gathering. How many people here would have believed me? How many people here would have believed me? But it's true. And I want you to remember this story. He said, every time that you suspect another person of doing something. And you might think that it's a crazy story. A cat's going to come in and drag out the pocketbook, right? This rabbi has two rabbis at the same gathering have a the same exact 2,000-year-old coin. It does happen. It's not common, but it certainly happens. And our job is to be Aaron the Kohen. When Aaron looks at the situation and he sees something that looks very suspicious, he thinks to himself, what crazy, crooked logic can I use to justify what this person did? And that's the job of every one of us, to be like Aaron the Kohen, to judge. When we judge another person's negat, to look at it through the eyes of Aaron the Kohen. Chaim.